以推那个
视频啊什么的。
哎，对对，视频可以推。
视频啊，片头哈，好了，行，那好了，我现在开始啊，好了。
好，谢谢。反正就是可以，我们要准备就是一直推到它出现呐，哈。哎，卡手来了吗
？Not yet。
还没来呀？啊，这怎么回事啊？他知道今天的哦。
我叫了他，他。
香港民主与自由的希望正在经受血与火的考验。繁华的都市，璀璨的车河，转瞬被刺耳的警笛和刺眼的红光充斥。曾经熙熙攘攘的车道，被誓死捍卫基本人权的民众填满。集权者毁掉文明需要多久？只需要1天。一个现代文明体系的建立，需要上千年的沉淀积累。这颗璀璨的东方明珠，如今暴力与屠戮在摧毁着这座伟大的城市。繁华催泪瓦斯，投向手无寸铁的都市。5大最基本的诉求，令人情教。
This intro takes
从
2 minutes, but now
到2020年香港人民度过了最漫长黑暗的360天。
不是他想的，这正是他的问题。
好，卡手。
黑暗、恐惧笼罩着这座城市。2600多位抗议者被黑警殴打致残。 7019名示威者被捕，3000多位年轻勇士被黑警凌虐致死，惨绝人寰。经济全线下滑，曾经繁荣的港口一片萧瑟。刽子手的刀枪阻挡不了人民对自由的向往。香港，这艘承载了中华民族希望的巨轮，必将挣脱桎梏，驶出港湾，把民主与自由的种子播散全中国。
Hello, and welcome to GTV-UK News. This is Dr. Ming from London. Today is Wednesday, 27th January 2021. As the US administration changes, many strategies and policies against the Chinese Communist Party CCP change too. Exactly what are these changes? What is their likely impact? In this weekly interview with Mr. Stephen K. Bannon, me and my colleagues will put these questions to him. Hello, Mr. Bannon.
Hello, Dr. Ming. Thank you very much for having me on GTV.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bannon. So, first question is mine. Mr. My School is changing his post-Trump strategy against the CCP. What about you?
Well, no, I think Miles is the leader, I would say, of the anti-CCP movement throughout the world. I think his strategy is that he's given the Biden administration, right, some time to get their sea legs, but I think he's still the leader in the anti-CCP movement globally. Our strategy has not changed. We are obviously aligned with Miles and all the new federal state of China and the whistleblower movement in really confronting the Chinese Communist Party throughout the world. But we are also, since we're a political site, and I'm, one of the leaders of the populist nationalist movement in the country, we're very much a centerpiece for confronting the Biden administration, not just on its CCP policy, but on all the domestic policies also, which we think tie into it. So no, we are prepared to work with the Biden administration where we see that they're really trying to unite the country. But right now, their radical agenda for America is not trying to unite the country. It's trying to disunite the country. So we're fighting the Biden administration every day here domestically, and we are at the forefront and the leaders in the U.S. For the confrontation of the Chinese Communist Party. Your audience should understand that 4 minutes into the Biden administration, at 12:04 p.m., the Chinese Communist Party officially sanctioned myself and 27 other Americans, including Mike Pompeo, Matt Pottinger, Peter Navarro, and other leaders of the anti-CCP faction in the U.S. government under President Trump. And so I wear that as a badge of honor. I'm very proud of it. It means I can't travel to China. It means that I cannot supposedly not work with Chinese companies, which is quite frankly illegal here in the United States. So it's another illegal thing the Chinese Communist Party has done. And so I've been officially and formally sanctioned. I think it's the only time a civilian has ever been sanctioned by the Chinese Communist Party. But I consider myself hopefully public enemy number one against the CCP and against the barbarism. So no, we continue to hammer the Chinese Communist Party every day, and particularly hammer the Biden administration to make sure that they stay on the same path that the Trump administration had in its relationships with the Chinese Communist Party.
All right. Thank you. Next question is from Castle. Daniel, would you please ask that question on his behalf, because Castle is not here today.
Hi, Mr. Bannon. It's Daniel. Sorry, Castle is absent today. So the question he raised and what he says, the first episode of War Room, The Pandemic, went air on the 25th of January of 2020. According to my memory, upon its 1-year anniversary, firstly, I present my congratulations to the War Room team and many appreciations for revealing the truth of the CCP virus. Secondly, then the question, what's next for the War Room?
It's a great question. First of all, I want to thank GTV, G News, Miles Guo, I mean, we would have never really understood the scale of this problem. We had the first anniversary on Monday, on the 25th. And the reason is that I was up in New York with Miles for Miles Guo's annual Lunar New Year celebration that we do every year to kind of, do a couple of days of broadcasting and talk about the CCP, talk about the people of China. And he told me then, we had heard through watching the websites that there was something, maybe a SARS breakout or some sort of SARS breakout in central China. But Miles really opened my eyes. He said, hey, there's not going to be a Lunar New Year, which shocked me because it's the first time, I think, in 10,000 years there hasn't been a Lunar New Year. It was absolutely stunning to me. Miles and the people at G News, GTV were telling me what was going on at Hubei. We were able to make contacts and relationships and really start a show that was at the forefront of the pandemic, of really covering the pandemic. And, it's a testament, I think, to people like yourselves and Dr. Ming and Casso, this diaspora that is absolutely fearless in trying to get to the truth, to help the Chinese people in the mainland gain their freedom, also to help the diaspora of the Chinese people throughout the world to maintain their freedom, and also to help the West and the rest of the world understand the monster they're confronting in the Chinese Communist Party. Here's what we're going to do going forward. We're going to continue to report and make the centerpiece of the show about the Chinese Communist Party and its relationship to the world and how that affects the world. And obviously the pandemic is a central part of that. Today we're going to have Bill Gertz on. Bill Gertz, on our second or third show, in fact, this is the first year anniversary, talked about the Wuhan lab, talked about the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, control of the bioweapons program there. That led, Dr. Yan came forward and came out of Hong Kong shortly thereafter. Miles Guo had been saying this from the absolute beginning, and he was mocked and ridiculed and said, oh, he's a conspiracy theory guy, he's a fantasist. It turns out everything Miles Guo said was 100% correct. Everything Dr. Yan said was correct. And everything Bill Gertz said it was correct. So we're going to continue to have the hammer dropped on this. And particularly right now, there has not been an accounting. There's not been any responsibility. Xi just gave his Davos speech the other day and did not mention at all their responsibility and accountability for the Chinese Communist Party virus that came out of the Wuhan lab. And so, I think you saw from Xi's comments the other day, they really, CCTV wants to start talking about it. Came out of Fort Detrick, the bio lab up in Western Maryland. But we're going to continue to hammer every day the Chinese Communist Party's responsibility for this global pandemic and this plague that they have led upon the world.
Okay, thank you. The next two questions are from Dr. Stella. She's not here, and Mike would ask her on her behalf. Mike, please.
Hello, Mr. Bannon, and this is from Dr. Stella. So the question is, based on the election results, do you think we have lost the information battleground to the CCP? In hindsight, what do you think we can do differently to change the results or to fight against the CCP in terms of information warfare? Thank you, Mr. Bannon. This is the first question.
The first thing we have to do is continue efforts and shows like yourselves and War Room, etc. This is getting the truth out. And this is one of the reasons the War Room's one of the biggest shows, if not the biggest show in the world, when you count everybody that sees it every day and how the information is pushed out. And that's because of, a big part of that's because of our connection with Lao Beijing and the connection with the diaspora of the Chinese people. Yes, certainly the tech oligarchs, and I think this is very important for the American people to understand. For months and months and months, we had specials on Saturday that would talk about the firewall that really separated the Chinese people on the mainland from the truth. A firewall that was essentially built by American technology and American companies in partnership with the Chinese Communist Party. You're seeing a firewall here today. Mike Lindell, the great CEO of MyPillow and one of the foremost voices in the Trump movement, and one of the foremost voices really of with his advertising dollars of supporting conservative media, was taken down permanently from Twitter today. He's already been banned by a number of different social media platforms, but he was banned permanently for Twitter for just speaking out of his concept of what the truth is. That it doesn't comport to what they want to do, and so they just take it down. So no, I think the most important thing we do is keep fighting, and by that I mean keep doing stories, keep doing analysis, keep pushing out the truth. Never relent from that. Never back off. And so I think that's absolutely the most important thing of information warfare. And look, people understand and see that something's wrong here, deeply wrong, and they see that something's deeply wrong in how the Chinese Communist Party has comported itself both to the Chinese people about this pandemic and also throughout the world. And so I think the truth ultimately wins out if we don't quit the fight.
And thank you, Mr. Bannon. And the second one is actually connected to your answer. So our connection between we want to bridge the gap between West and the East, the understanding of the CCP, but the bridge is now still limited. What suggestions do you have for us to broaden this bridge, to get the information out for the West? Thank you.
I think the way to broaden it is continue to do quality shows like Dr. Ming and you all do right now. Listen, the theory of mass communication, or the mass communication theory, one of the predicates of it is great content will always find distribution. Great content will always find an audience. And what I continue to say is just keep doing what you're doing and keep pushing it out. What you have to do is enlist an army, really, like the Wu Mao 50 Cent Army is the running dogs for the CCP. You also, and I think this, you've seen it in the whistleblower movement, you've seen the new federal state of China, you see it in what Miles Guo represents. You see a whole new generation of activists, of Chinese American or Chinese that in the diaspora that live in Europe that are now activists and want to help their countrymen and want to help their country be free. The most important thing is just pushing out, become a force multiplier, and just push out this content everywhere. That is step one. If we can get that, you're going to see a much bigger and a more broadening audience that competes with the lies of the CCP.
Thank you, Mr. Bannon. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Bannon, hours into his presidency, Biden fired Michael Pack, the head of the U.S. Agency for Global Media, USAGM, and nominated Ke Lu Chao to be the interim head. And Chao carried out a purge for VOA, RFA, and RFE. What is your comment?
Well, I think it tells you everything about the Biden administration. This is why we're jamming up. We're very proud that we are confronting the Biden administration on all their radicalness. You know, we are the ones that were the forefront that stopped their immigration amnesty bill. Their single most important piece of legislation was going to be the amnesty bill that would basically give citizenship to 25 million illegal aliens. That's dead in the water right now. That's deader than the impeachment of Trump. This thing's they're already talking about how they break it up into small pieces and how they get the pieces put there. That's the single most important piece of legislation. That's what they put on the table day one. That's already been stopped. Yesterday in a federal court in Texas, they actually stopped Biden's radical executive order not to deport any criminal aliens. That was stopped by a Texas judge in a federal court. That was stopped. Biden's already come out with a this radical transgender initiative by an executive order saying that boys can basically compete in girls' sports. We are essentially in the process of stopping that and making that a national issue. What he's done on the CCP, Tony Blinken, these people try to have a very moderate composure in responding to the CCP, but quite frankly, it's very radical. If you look at the confrontation President Trump had of actually confronting the CCP across a broad range, and if you look at what happened in the last week of the administration, the intelligence agency and the State Department came out and designated that Wuhan was actually under the control of the PLA, that they had lied about it, and that the experiments of the Batwoman were actually PLA experiments, and they were gain-of-function experiments that went awry, and that this leaked out from the Wuhan lab. If you see what Pompeo did about designating genocide against the Uyghurs, that the CCP is a genocide regime against the Uyghurs, if you see what he did about Huawei, there were actions taken, and also DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, which really the CIA reports to, said the Chinese Communist Party had an active role in the 2020 election. If you look at those actions the last week, that was putting the CCP on notice by the Trump administration. Biden's trying to unwind all that. He's already allowed the CCP opportunity to come into the power grid into the United States. He's been feckless about his response to Xi's really, to me, inappropriate speech at Davos, right? And so you've seen that the way we're going to handle the CCP is the same way we're handling immigration, the wall, girls' sports, this radical social agenda. We're going to confront the Biden administration every day. We're not going to back off, and that's going to force them to be tougher on the CCP. It should not be lost in your audience. During the confirmation hearing, Tony Blinken, these guys, to get confirmed, in order to get confirmed by the United States Senate, we're sitting there go, oh yeah, a lot of what happened under the Trump administration with the CCP was actually good, and we should realign ourselves to actually more of this confrontational confrontational alignment, although we're going to call it strategic patience. So as long as we continue to hammer the Biden administration and reveal that to the American people, your audience shouldn't miss the most fundamental point. The American people are tired of the Chinese Communist Party and their activities throughout the world. That has been the biggest thing that we have changed over the last 4 or 5 years. Part of that is because of things like GTV and G Media, G News. Part of it's because of the War Room, and others because we've got activists now that are actually engaged on a daily basis of bringing truth to the American people. And so I think I think it's been a huge sea change. The Biden administration will only do what they're forced to do because they're obviously compromised by the Chinese Communist Party, but they're being forced. I think they're being forced into a corner where they're going to have to respond, maybe not as tough as President Trump, but at least down that line of action.
Okay. Daniel, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, Mr. Bannon, Daniel. On the January the 20th, Mike Pompeo was interviewed by the Newsmax TV, and he said, quote, "Hope U.S. stays tough on China." Do you think Biden's new administration will stick to it? Thank you.
It's a great question. Only if they're forced to stick to it. Remember, their natural inclination is appeasement. Let's go back in time. Biden was in charge of the pivot to Asia under President Obama. The pivot to Asia was supposed to be strategically to shift out of the Middle East, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and start to confront our quote-unquote strategic partner, which was the Chinese Communist Party, or China, and particularly as they try to consolidate the Eurasian landmass. And the hot spots would be obviously the border of India and China, but more importantly, the South China Sea and the Straits of Taiwan and Taiwan itself, and the littoral nations around the South China Sea. That would be for the kinetic part of this. But also is beginning to awareness of this economic and information warfare as the Chinese Communist Party performs unrestricted warfare across a wide scope of the battlefield. And Joe Biden was in charge of that, and he completely blew it. You had a increased militarization of the South China Sea. You had an increase in cyber intrusions into American corporations and the theft of intellectual property. This all happened under Obama's watch, of which Biden was in charge of. So in this administration, if you heard, it's the same cast of characters. It's Tony Blinken, it's Jake Sullivan. It's these same weak-willed, very appeasement-oriented, foreign policy experts that essentially kowtow to the Chinese Communist Party. And so what our mission is to make sure that by exposing the truth and exposing what the reality is, we awaken the American people even more, and they are forced, this administration is forced to take dramatic action. Let's go back and be very specific. President Xi gives this speech at Davos the other day, which is essentially either a victory speech or a throwdown. You can take your pick, about they're going to drive the agenda for the world, right? And this agenda is going to be off the totalitarian, authoritarian, state capitalist model that essentially enslaves the Chinese people and makes the rest of the workers in the world serfs because of the enslavement of the Chinese people and the unfair labor practices that the Chinese Communist Party impose upon Lao Beijing. And so, and what was Biden's response? There hasn't been a response. Jen Psaki, this kind of hapless press secretary that's up there, is talking about strategic patience and interagency process and all this mumbo jumbo, right? All this bureaucratic speak. In which they have not come back, and they have not had a response yet to President Xi's speech. This is only being viewed in Beijing as weakness and confusion and not understanding what the plot is. And if you can see the throughput of President Trump, and particularly the muscular confrontation that we had with the Chinese Communist Party to really put them on notice that you're not going to run the world like you run China. Right? You're not going to enslave the world like you've already enslaved the Chinese people. In fact, the story of the first half of the 21st century is the quest for freedom of the Chinese people against the Chinese Communist Party.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bannon. And based on Mr. Maisgo's source, the CCP is trying hard to arrange Xi Jinping to visit the U.S. as soon as possible, as well as Kamala Harris to visit China. How likely will this CCP's diplomatic attempts be successful?
I think Miles is right. We know there's a lot of activity, and Miles has great sources, a lot of activity that they want to have a meeting. Remember, they were the ones that wanted to, they were the ones that met first with the Obama administration, much to the chagrin of our Japanese allies. That's why the Japanese came here and met first at Mar-a-Lago. Chinese were second. We know that the Chinese are very anxious to have a meeting to show the world that the Biden administration is kowtowing to them. Kamala Harris her husband's, comes from a law firm, D.L. Piper, that has very deep relationships with the Chinese Communist Party. So I think right now it's really the American people that are going to drive this agenda, not Biden. Your audience has to understand one thing. The American people are awakening to this situation because of the relentless coverage given by the War Room and others. And so this coverage is not going to stop. We're going to continue to confront every day exactly what's going on. And I think you're seeing a big shift, a seismic shift in people's understanding of our nation and the world's relationship to the Chinese Communist Party. That is going to limit dramatically Biden's field of maneuver. He's going to have to acquiesce to many of the Trump policies. And here's why you know this. Go back to the confirmation hearings. Not one time did Blinken or Yellen or any of these people sit there and counter what the Trump administration said. Yesterday, Ted Cruz, in the confirmation hearing of the Commerce Secretary, actually jumped all over her about her being very weak about this whole involvement of U.S. capital markets and Wall Street in funding Chinese Communist Party companies that have been put on the index list of our entities list, what we call it, here in the United States. So no, you're seeing a confrontation across the board, and this will be a major issue in 2022 and 2024. And so the Biden administration is going to have very little room for flexibility here.
Okay. And next question is from a call. So Mike, would you help? Oh, sorry. Daniel, would you please help?
Yes. These the PLA aircrafts, including the jet fighters and bombers, including Taiwan air defense and identity zone for the consecutive days. Meanwhile, the U.S. sent the Roosevelt carrier fleet to Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. Personally, how likely will there be a kinetic war on Taiwan, and what will be the Biden administration's response? Thanks, Bannon.
Listen, this is another testing you're seeing from the Chinese Communist Party immediately. The air flights, the unauthorized and illegal air flights over Taiwan is to intimidate the Taiwanese people and intimidate the United States. This whole issue about this carrier battle group, strike battle groups in the South China Sea is another issue of intimidation. The South China Sea is absolutely essential to world trade and world peace. That's why, almost 50 years ago, or 45 years ago, I was a young naval officer on a destroyer in a carrier battle group. Guess where? In the South China Sea, patrolling the South China Sea back in the mid-70s. Why was that? Because that waterway is absolutely essential to the peace and prosperity of all of Asia and therefore the world. And so it's essential that waterway be absolutely free for navigation. And the Chinese Communist Party considers that an inland sea of China. This is just not acceptable. The Biden administration is being tested and probed every day by the Chinese Communist Party, and so far they're showing weakness and fecklessness. There hasn't been any response so far about the flights over Taiwan, and quite frankly, they're trying to intimidate them about this carrier battle group. What I would do with the carrier battle group is steam the carrier battle group right through the Taiwan Straits to make sure that the Chinese Communist Party understood that the Taiwan Straits are also free and open for navigation for every ship, every vessel in the world, for peace and prosperity. Look, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to consolidate the Eurasian landmass with their allies in North Korea, or their vassal state of North Korea, but also their allies in Iran, Turkey, and Russia, and Pakistan. Those nations are working essentially in unison to try to, as an axis, to try to consolidate the Eurasian landmass. And with that, to cause nothing but trouble, because they're all essentially totalitarian dictatorships. okay, are authoritarian dictatorships. That is the central problem the world has today, with the Chinese Communist Party being the leader in that. As they put their influence into Europe, they put their influence in the United States further and further. It has to be confronted. People want to look the other way because people want peace and prosperity. They don't want to have to confront this evil. And that's why your network is so important. That's why, Dr. Ming, your show is so important. It's why all the great contributors you have to ask these great questions every week to me are so important. You're at the vanguard of a democracy movement, a rule of law movement, a movement to free Lao Beijing, to free the Chinese people from this totalitarian dictatorship. The world will not have peace and prosperity until the Chinese people are free. Once the Chinese people are free, we will begin the process of moving towards the sunlit uplands that are ahead of us. But it won't happen. It will not happen a day before the Chinese people are free and they have the rule of law, they have democracy, they have self-determination.
Okay, thank you very much. And next question, Dr. TCC, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Bannon. We are all with you about that. You know, this time we have to stand up strong and together and to take down the CCP. And so now let me move you to Europe. So yesterday, Italian Prime Minister Conte stepped down. And will Salvini be able to take the position? As we know that Salvini, known as the captain by his supporters, and is one of the main leaders of the populist movement in Europe, and has first to support Dr. Yan's COVID-19 as the CCP's bioweapon theory. However, in the news, it seems that the President Mattarella still wants to give Conte a chance to form a majority to retake the position. So will Salvini be able to take the position? What's your prediction?
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough right now. I think Salvini is obviously one of the leaders of the populist movement with Bolsonaro, President Trump, Le Pen, Nigel Farage, one of the leaders throughout the world. I think it's very difficult. What I've always told with Salvini, you have to have an economic plan that's different than what the elites are putting out. Italy's a great tragedy, such a great country, such great people. The political system there is just so, so screwed up. They've got elitists really controlled by Brussels because of their relationship with the EU. I think Conte's going to get another chance. The fix is always in to continue to have these kind of provisional governments, essentially what they are. I think it's a great tragedy. But I don't see really Salvini and the populists and the nationalists there coming to power until they present a bold alternative on the economic side to the Italian people. So I think it's a tough one. As you know, the CCP is deeply involved in Italy. The CCP is trying to make investments. The CCP is working with their partners in the Vatican, Pope Francis. There's a great book out to talk about their deep involvement in Italy, and it's just absolutely a tragedy. It's really at the forefront of stopping the CCP in Europe will be Italy. And I think you're seeing right now the CCP's involvement, and that's why you see the country's going sideways. It's 9:30. I've actually got to jump because I've got another interview. So, Dr. Ming, one last question or one last.
Okay. Yes, please. Okay, Sky-san, please.
Yeah. Hello, Mr. Bannon. I'm Sky-san. My question is: on the 21st of January, the European Parliament passed a resolution about the CCP crackdown of the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement. How will this resolution affect the Euro and China comprehensive agreement on investment?
Look, I see all the proclamations, but I don't see the actions. I think this whole deal about this investment, and particularly led by the Germans, is very, very disturbing. What you don't want to have is a CCP. Basically, their investments influence peddling to turn politicians. I think the single biggest thing, the West has failed Hong Kong and has failed itself in not stepping up to the CCP and not sanctioning people. Look, I've been sanctioned by the CCP. Why have we not sanctioned Wan Shan? Why have we not sanctioned Xi and their families? Why has the West not done that? I think the most important thing to watch for right now for your audience is to see what's happening in Great Britain and the United Kingdom. I think they've offered 5 million passports or 5 million citizenships to the Hong Kong people to come to the United Kingdom. So I think you're seeing a lot of proclamations. I want to see more action. And the only way they're going to take more action is shows like yourselves. The more this information gets out, particularly the insidious nature of the Chinese Communist Party and the insidious nature of how that comes with capital investment. Once they start putting money to work, they're essentially buying politicians. They're buying influence. They're buying media. That's why your show and GTV and G News throughout the world and others are so vitally important to get the word out. The more we get that word out, you're going to see a sea change among people saying, hey, why are we having the Chinese Communist Party in our country? Why are we having them, build infrastructure? Why are we having Huawei on the telephone and internet system? And just what politicians have turned into running dogs for the Chinese Communist Party?
Yeah, thank
Great
you.
question.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bannon. Thank you for joining us today.
I love doing the show. You guys are fantastic. And by the way, your questions are always 10 times better than any questions that get asked here by American or European media. So thank you very much for the great questions and all the work you guys do.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bannon. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Thanks.
Same time, same place.
Thank you,
so
Bannon.
much.
Thank you,
Mr. Bannon. Bye-bye.
Thank
So,
you.
Mr. Bannon is a great fighter against the CCP. And we, the fellow warriors of the new federal state of China and the exposure revolution, determined to join forces of various sorts to achieve our ultimate goal, that is, to take down the CCP. Okay, please go to GTV and G News for more information about our fight against the CCP. See you next time. Thank you.